but it's not like being able to go back. So thank you for that. Um, so the two questions we last time we did the questions. What did you interview? Who did you interview, and what were your questions? And then the second part of it was what impressed you about your informants and their answers. And then so now we're going to. So don't feel uncomfortable about repeating things. I think that's inevitable. The next two questions are what barriers and boosters existed in remote learning, and what worked and didn't work. So what were the barriers and boosters to remote learning, and what worked and didn't work? And then the second set of questions is what did you learn from your experience doing this? And that's completely open-ended. It could be your personal experience, just any observations that you care to make. It could be about the process, about the question at hand, which has to do with remote learning and digital equity. So really, so let's start, and we'll do it like we did last time. I think we're going to do them together. Let's do the questions together. So what? Let's start. Ellington, can we start with you because you're in my screen here. Um, what barriers and boosters existed for remote learning, and what worked and didn't work?
This is for the people I interviewed.
Yes.
Okay. So the biggest thing that I heard, like as a barrier was like lack of interaction between the students and the teachers, like between student teacher and then also between the students themselves. Um, and then I would say another barrier, my siblings talked about a lot of technical difficulties. They said that there was a lot of times that they would have to go out of or they would be kicked out of the meeting and then have to log back in. So they'd be missing some instruction time. And then the high schooler that I had interviewed, he also said there was problems with that as well. So students who were using computers that they had received from the schools, they would be slower. My siblings also said that kind of the same thing as well, but that the computers would be slower and they wouldn't be able to download all of the assignments that they were asked to download. So they would have issues with that, but I can't speak too much on that because that's just what they know from their friends. So they didn't like firsthand have that experience of not being able to download those things, but they know that other kids were having those issues. I'm trying to think what other barriers there were. So the high school kid that I was talking to, one was just being at home and like having the distractions of being at home. So like knowing that there was things that needed to be done in the house, like chores or like having his mom like interrupt to do things, to get things done while he's like in class. So that was another barrier that he had brought up for the high school student. Um, I think that's about it
Mm-hmm.
that I can think of.
Yeah. Okay. So you had the sibling group and the family friend, and there were fourth and fifth grade, and then you also had a high school. The
Mhm.
family friend was a high school student.
Mhm.
Okay. Uh, and then you also said that some people there was really an individual difference that some students really learned more, just were wired differently. Were you? Am I sort of getting that?
Yeah, so like my younger siblings, especially like my little sister who's like super tech heavy, she knows how to do all this stuff. She plays on her video games all the time. She really enjoyed the online setting because she's really used to that at home. And also I think it helped to have, there's two other kids there with her, so she's not by herself.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, she really seemed to like the online setting and didn't really have any like problems with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Um, so what about were the boosters? I th- I think it's natural to fix on the problems. But what were the boosters from your that really helped? I mean, what were advantages to this that might, you know?
My younger siblings said that it was kind of more organized, so they were able to access their their assignments easier. So like it was kind of listed. They would have like for the day, they would have a list of what they needed to get done. So there wasn't like a billion papers flying around. They had it on their computer. They could just download it and then re-upload it, or yeah, re-upload it with the answers. So that was one thing that they had talked about. Another one that they said it was just easier to get up in the morning and just basically just go back to your room. So there wasn't like the hassle of like getting up and getting ready and having to get out the door. For
Mhm.
them, that's a lot to do, especially at that age. They think that's that it takes a lot. So they enjoyed that aspect of not having to, like get everything ready to get like their backpack ready and all that stuff. Everything was just in their room.
I can totally relate to that.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Uh, so a lot of it had to do with, if I'm hearing you right, sort of with the inherent closeness of everything. You didn't have to transfer from one place to another.
Mhm.
Whether it's physically or, I get it about the papers. Uh, I think you reach a certain level in digital work where you either it's at some point your my organization system always seems to break down, and I've got things in different directories and different files, and I forgot how I decided where to put things. But at a kind of basic level, I think that I can see what you're saying is right. It really does. Uh, okay. Um, so what did you learn from this experience? Top to bottom, anything.
I would say I kind of looked at my experience and kind of compared it to theirs, and how much I really wasn't enjoying this online classroom setting, and my siblings didn't really seem to care either way. So that was something that I had learned, like maybe it's not as bad as I think for the younger kids because they're more in tune, or I guess maybe they're more used to this type of setting, or they'd be easier to adapt because they are younger and we've been doing this for so long. We've been doing like in-person classes and stuff our whole life basically, so it's a really hard thing for us to adapt to, but
Hmm.
for them it seemed like, okay, well, this is just how it is. I don't really see it as that big of a problem. We're all doing it. So that was something
Hmm.
I found was pretty interesting.
Hmm.
Another piece that I found was interesting was the difference between my siblings and then the high school student that I had interviewed. The high school student was kind of more similar to me and was like, this is not it. I don't like this experience. And I would much rather be in school. Whereas one of my siblings had said, one of my younger sisters had said, I asked her, would you want to do this forever? Like, would you want to be online forever? And she said, yeah, that would be fun. I would like that, and that was really interesting to me. So another thing that I thought that I learned a lot was learned about a lot was the lack of preparation, especially for my younger siblings. I feel like that their school could have prepared a lot better and been more creative with how they teach the students, because hearing from them that they have very little interaction with other students or with their own teachers was really upsetting for me to hear, because that's a big piece of development, is learning how to socialize with other people, and you're kind of taking that away, and they didn't really implement anything to combat that. So
Hmm.
that was really interesting to me.
Hmm. Yeah, I think what happens is these transitions like this, it's all the weaknesses of things get exposed. It's
Mhm.
so if you don't have a creative teacher, they're not going to be creative, and it's going to show a lot more
Mhm.
because they're having to adapt. It just takes longer for some people to adapt.
Mhm.
So, what about your personal? Was this useful for you personally? And you won't hurt my feelings by saying no, it was a waste of time. So
No, I
if that's
think
how you feel.
for me it was really interesting to actually think about that stuff, because I know like that we're all virtual, but it's not anything that I took a lot of time to think about, or like think about how it differs for the younger generation. And so overall, this entire thing, looking at not just like the interviews but the research that I did, and how students may be falling behind because of like not having access to computers, and also learning about how schools and communities are coming together to get children access to computers and Wi-Fi, and opening up or having like, I think Maggie had talked about having a bus that has Wi-Fi so students can pull
Mhm.
up and do their work. So that was really interesting to hear and learn about ways that the community were working together to help students alleviate some of the problems that we have been facing in this pandemic in
Mhm.
regards to like, school.
One of the things I'm obviously interested because I think a lot of what NAMI does is with people who are not, what's the term? There's a nice term for it. Uh, not typical.
Mhm.
People who are untypical, people with mental illness present themselves differently, have different kind of, even at the perceptual level and even down to the um, level of how they interact with their physical environments. So, did you have a sense of and this, I guess, relate to everyone, that people that this was particularly useful or deleterious for someone who wouldn't be typical? You know, not as a non. Is this pretty much confounding to everybody, regardless of whether they're quote unquote normal or not?
I think it could be in regards to like talking with the high schooler and hearing about how lonely he was doing online schooling. And so for someone like myself, who I've battled with depression and that feeling of loneliness, it's not like it's comforting, but it's like, oh, there's other people out there that feel like this. I'm not the only one that's struggling through this semester. I'm not crazy. I'm not like, there's other people that feel the same way I do. So I think
Hmm.
in that sense, it could definitely be helpful.
Yeah. Okay. I think there's a inclination for people to talk about these things more as well.
Mhm.
So there's a, because what you're saying is really perceptive, but it depends on the fact that somebody has expressed that opinion. I'm lonely. And it's not. It's there's a relational, implied relational uh, interaction below what you're saying.
Mhm.
Interesting. Thank you very much. Okay, Lauren, can you be next?
Yeah.
What were the barriers and boosters, and what could be done, have been done better?
Okay. So, for my first interviewee, a barrier she said, the principal said, was that um, it was more stressful to like plan for the school year and plan like meetings and classwork and things like that, because it's like double the amount of work than in the typical school year. Um, but like a plus, she said, was that if her kids were home, because they are home, but they're not, I think they're all going to be coming home right like once the school year is over for like colleges. She's like, it's going to be nice to have some time with my kids because they've been gone because of school, and they weren't coming back because they were on campus and they didn't want to bring anything back to their mom. So she said it would be nice to have that time. Um, I don't think there were that many positives though for her. She is a principal, she runs a school. It's very tedious work, let alone considering that they're no longer in school. So that physically checking up on certain students and making sure that the staff is doing well mentally, as well as the students and herself. She does say that She has a lot of time to exercise now when she wants to. That's her stress relief. She gets on like her exercise bike or her treadmill, and she appreciates the time to be able to do that because that wouldn't have happened in a normal school year. On the other hand, I recently interviewed my aunt who works for Farmington School District, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. And is also a mom of a child in DPS and in Farmington School District. So she said it's very stressful. She's teaching while she's also making sure that her own kids are in class or doing what they have to do. Her youngest child is extremely stressed out right now because they haven't had the chance to learn how to do the computer skills that they need for right now. My aunt teaches that in 7th grade, and her daughter's in 5th grade. So they literally haven't had the chance to learn a lot of the skills. So they'll be doing things on the computer, and she'll get stressed out. She'll just break down. She'll just cry because she doesn't
Oh,
know what to do, and she doesn't want to, like, she wants to get her work done, of course, but she's doing it wrong. She knows she's doing it wrong. For example, they have like timed writing, and she's young, so she types like this, and she can't type fast enough with just the 2 fingers to get it done in time. So she'll like the timing will cut out, and like that's the assignment. So
that's really,
it's turned in. So it's extremely stressful for her. Um, Positive though, because they just moved, like they're in the process of moving right now. So instead of having to like be worried about moving plus getting her kids to school, there's that. And like spending $60, she said, a week on gas because one of her children does go to Cass, which is not where they live, but he plays football. So
okay.
that's why. And
So say that again. I'm sorry, I missed that. Who goes to Cass?
her oldest son goes to Cass,
Okay, okay. So
but
is it open? It's not.
it's not open.
Hmm.
But like if it was, that would have been another stressful event to have to worry about. But since it's not open, they don't have to worry about that plus them moving to a new location.
They moved their house, you mean?
Yes,
Or,
they're moving. So they
oh,
did live like in the city, but they're moving now. So it's like less stress to have to worry about getting her kids to school because school is at the table. She also
yeah.
said it's nice to like wake up later. You know, as a teacher, you get up at 5, 6 a.m. to get to class and to set up for the
Hmm.
school day. Instead, she can get up later and get on Zoom. So it's nice. She
Hmm.
still prepares, of course, but it's not as tedious as literally having to get to the physical location. So, what was the other question?
Oh, what did you learn from this? Um,
Oh,
you know,
um, similar to what Ellington was saying, it's just nice to know that there are people going through the same thing as you are. Because we're isolated right now, you really don't get to know what everybody's doing. Um, my aunt says similar to what Southfield School District is doing, or that high school that I went to is doing. They have like wellness checks and things like that to like just talk about the situation at hand. Not even like with the school, just like talk about like we're still indoors. You know, it's stressful. I have my kids here, things like that. And she was saying that it's very nice to just talk to other parents and teachers because this would be a normal thing they would do, but they literally don't get the chance to. They don't meet in person at all. So I think she said they met in person once for like testing. I guess SAT still had to happen. I don't know.
oh, yeah.
So they did. She met once with a small group to facilitate SAT testing. What else did I learn? Ooh, sounds bad. It's just like it's very nice to just have the opportunity to even talk to people, if
Hmm.
that makes sense. Like, you know, college students, you're always talking to other college students. It was nice to talk to people in their careers and fields just about how this is affecting them, especially since it's education. It's a huge effect on them. Like both of my interviewees said, a lot of weight has fallen on the teachers to make sure that the students don't fall behind because either the parents can't make sure or they aren't making sure. So
Hmm.
it's like a lot of extra stress on them, let alone if they have their own children. Like I said, my aunt literally sits at a long table with her 2 kids she's teaching while also trying to make sure that her kids are okay with their schoolwork and if they have questions and things like that, literally as she's teaching her other class. So
Mm.
it's very tedious, but it's
Y-
nice to just talk about it. It's good to talk about it, especially because, like, we got to talk. They also both really heavily talked about, they were worried about the lack of socialization for the students because nobody goes out, you know. There's like no hallway passing time, talking, things like that. And my aunt was saying that she was worried about it, especially because like her children go to big schools. They're literally missing out on like a very large amount of socialization and they're just in the house all day. That's all they do. And they're very active, football, basketball, track, and they don't get to do those things anymore. So pretty
mhm.
interesting.
Yeah. 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 Very good. That's. Thank you very much. Because I get it. I think what you're saying, what I associated with was when people were talking, people talked to each other, parents, students, that usually you would have structures. You know, you'd send your teacher a note, or you would have a conference, and this is kind of flattened that interaction. So there's no, the channels aren't, the old channels you can't use anymore. You have to, you just reach out.
I think what Kaylin just said in the chat is what's happening with my cousin too, because she literally does not get to see her friends. And every day is like more and more stress added on of like work coming in, being worried about classwork. I think my aunt said that she literally, like, at a point she just stopped going to Zoom class and my aunt like gets the work from the teacher and like after she does her teaching, she teaches my cousin her work that way because it's easier than to have her sit there like having a meltdown while she's trying to teach. Because what do you do? Do you
Huh.
stop your class to help your child, which is what most people would do,
Oh my
or do you
goodness.
continue with the all the other students? So instead of having to worry about that, she's just like, we're not going to do it like that. Thankfully, she is a teacher though. So this
Yeah.
is what she does. But I can imagine in other situations that would be another extremely stressful thing to even have to worry about, especially like with math stuff. I've seen how they teach math these days. It doesn't
Uh-huh.
make any sense. Like my sister will text me asking me about math questions. I'm like, I don't know what this is. I've never seen this before. It's extremely hard in that sense. So imagine you're not even a teacher, you're just a regular parent having to teach certain things to your kid and you never seen it and you need to be taught it. So that plus maybe even have work, probably like extremely stressful at minimum.
Yeah.
So
So let me go back for a second and see if I've got it right. There
mhm,
was a teacher who was teaching her class at home, and her child was there. And so the problem was, if your child was also in their class, maybe in another room or something,
mhm,
what happens if the child gets stressed and
exactly,
um, so
exactly.
what was the solution to that? Did you
My
what?
aunt, my aunt decided that she would stop going to Zoom class and that she would get the work that she has to do from her teacher in the beginning of the week and do
Okay.
it that way
So
because it's
so she kind of
easier.
staged it,
Mhm,
so that you didn't, they weren't, things weren't happening simultaneously.
right.
I got you.
Because they would have been because they're in the same
Sure.
school district and everything.
Yeah.
Literally like same school, different grade. So
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. So there's just a lot of complications that you can't anticipate.
that's why I
I.
wanted to interview her because I knew she would have that two-sided
Hmm.
look at things. Like my principal, if her kids were still in high school, she would have as well, but they're not. And then my aunt gets the teacher side plus like middle school versus high school. So she gets to see it. She said that her son's grades have dropped too,
Mm.
but like not as poorly as she said she's seen other students. because of the whole no credit thing that I guess a lot of schools did this year. So when they came back for this semester, most students were still on the where we can just do minimum work and get credit. But that's not true.
Mhm.
So
Got it. Okay, great. So what was your, how did you, I'm so deep into some of the other things. How did you feel like this was as an exercise for your learning, and was it useful to
well, this
you?
was
And
great. It was very nice to pick up some new skills for interviewing since I haven't done it before. This was like my second major interview or third major interview, if that makes sense. So just trying to pick up on what's being put down, if that makes sense. Ask more questions based on what the person has answered to get into, like, not to lead them, but to just understand the whole
Mhm,
situation as a whole was
mhm,
very interesting. So it was it was like a good opportunity for me.
mhm.
Very helpful.
There's a psychological term called theory of mind. I don't know if you've gotten into it, where especially in developmental and with some other kind of animal species, um, it's a kind of cognitive state where you can anticipate what the other person's thinking, uh, and you have a theory of what their mind is, and so I think interviewing, being consciously uh, of your own interview skills and developing, honing those helps you in when you're being interviewed. You can see what the person's doing. You know, you can kind of you can have a theory of mind about the interview situation. And I don't know if that makes any sense, but okay, cool. Thank you very much, Lauren.
You're
Okay,
welcome.
Matt. Yeah, it's great. Maggie,
Yeah. Remind me of the first question if you could.
sure, of course. What barriers and boosters existed to remote learning, and what worked and didn't work?
Okay. So from the teacher's perspective, my mother was the one who gave the most information on this, and the barriers for teaching really, I guess both of my parents, they're very much project learning based, or at least that would be common in their classrooms. And so because they couldn't rely that the students had materials at their own houses, they had to cut a lot of labs and a lot of projects out of their curriculum, which was kind of difficult. And like that, there were big informational portions. There was a lot of learning that they were missing out on in that sense. But other than that, they didn't really have many barriers. I asked them for the student perspective in their eyes. Um, they said what they saw from students and what they were hearing back from students was that some of them loved it, loved the online learning at their own pace, but some of them it was really hard for them to like be self-motivated to get on and do it. Especially for middle schoolers, they found that like maturity level really factored into how much they were getting out of the online experience. And most of the middle schoolers they were in charge of were actually failing most of their classes because again, like
Hmm.
Ellington Learn we're talking about, they were used to last semester where everybody passed their classes regardless of like their grades. And so I think they were continuing that mindset this year, and so that was kind of hard for the students. Um, and then more on a personal level as teachers, they were receiving a lot more like family issues, like really personal emails from the students, and which they're used to, but I think being behind a computer screen, the students felt more comfortable reaching out. And so there was more of a burden on the teachers with the students' personal problems that they had to also like be in charge of, and they had that. So those were a couple of the barriers or like the burdens of online teaching, but overall, both my parents really, really liked this, and it was more of how our school was set up and how they were teaching online, but they love they love teaching, they love their students, and they were given more opportunities to like do one-on-one teaching, and that kind of takes away the like being in the classroom. There's a lot of extra stuff you have to deal with, like if the students are disrespecting you, um, more of like the personal level stuff where you don't necessarily get along, or you have to worry about telling them to take their hats off in class and they shouldn't be like talking, all of the extra things. And in this case, they were just able to teach. Like they helped the students who need the help, and that was great for them. And then especially since they were able to work at home, both of their stress levels were way reduced. They didn't have to worry about like COVID as much, and like their health this year has been a lot easier because like my mother a few years ago she had a heart attack in her classroom because of how much stress the job puts on her, and so like this year she has been so much better, like being able to be at home and not have to worry about her safety and everything. So they both like they really enjoy the position they've been put at.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Okay. So in that, sounds like even though they didn't have the project basis for some of their classes, they were really, this was just fine with them. They were not only prepared, but they made the adjustment and actually was easier.
Right. And that
Yeah.
was also helpful to, it was easier to accommodate the students because it was a more one-on-one basis. They could get students what they needed easier.
I see. So the students really had to kind of interact more with your
Mhm.
parents, probably than they would in an in-person class.
Right. Yeah, they got a
Huh.
lot more individual attention, and I think that's beneficial.
That's interesting. Okay, thanks. So, Maggie, how did you see this assignment, and what was your takeaway? And you know,
Um, like in the professional logistical takeaway, I thought like sitting down and being able to conduct an interview, but in like a safe environment because it was with my family members. It was a good first, like
huh.
get your foot in the door and how to do that in a comfortable setting and without the fear of like messing up or not knowing how to like not saying the exact right thing. So that was really helpful. And then the information they gave me, I've never really thought about like yes, going online. I had to assume that there were going to be like some switches that schools had to do, but the how massive the transition was and how much that was actually put into this kind of blew my mind because I never really like I didn't think about it that hard, but it was cool seeing the inner workings of the school and what exactly had to go into making this change. And then
Hmm.
more for my personal takeaway from this, it was kind of cool to see how much my interviewees, my parents, really care about their job and their students. And like I knew this, but going home over break and then seeing them work from 7 a.m. to like 9 p.m. There'd be Zoom calls at like 8:30 with their students, and like they just kept doing it. And that was so wild to me because it's really like school day's done at 2:30. They don't have to work later than that, but how much the teachers are taking on themselves to make sure the kids are getting as much as they need. That was really cool.
Hmm. Great. Let me ask you a little bit more about the massive transition. Can you
Mhm.
kind of give a few examples or describe something that would?
Yeah, I think I talked about this a little bit in the last meeting, but like how the school had to ask for like I think it was the CARE Act that I said last time to get grants, and then them purchasing all of the new Chromebooks and all of the hotspots and getting those distributed to students,
Yeah.
and like they changed their bus routes and they changed with the in-person kids when they were still in person, so they had 2 bus routes going in the morning so it wasn't as full, and then they switched up like lunch schedules so they weren't eating with as many people in the cafeteria, and just like all of those little changes that really go into it really adds up.
Uh-huh. Right. I'm sure in ways that we can't even imagine. Uh, yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. Good. Um, okay. Thank you. That's really helpful. And now, Nick, what you're up. So what were the barriers and boosters, and what worked and didn't work?
Well, I think the big barrier. Well, first of all, it was really interesting listening to everybody, and that was great to hear. And then I think just continuing off what a bunch of people said too is some of the big boosters I thought were like for the family and like their neighbors in their pod. Coming from kind of an affluent background, kind of an affluent district. Their access to technology was really like outstanding. Like they all had like a laptop or an iPad. They had headphones, so it's not like they were getting like a bunch of noise feedback from everybody else, like working in the same environment. So like their technology, like availability and what they were able to use was really outstanding and was really helping the whole process. Likewise, the barrier then for the more disadvantaged, charter school was that technology wasn't really available, and it was a huge scramble on part of that school to try to get everybody on somewhat of an equal playing field in terms of like what technology they're able to use with their remote learning. So it was just, that was one of the big kind of like realizations. I guess I could have guessed that this would have been the case. But it really was kind of a stark contrast in who is coming out on top in terms of these like remote learning situations. It's going to be the people who, the families who are able to like afford like all the necessary technology. They're the ones that are actually getting the most out of this than the people who are scrambling trying to make it work, or maybe don't have access to these things. So. But in terms of other boosters or barriers, that was kind of the big one and the most outstanding ones for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think your example of the pod is where you had this multi-aged pod from grade school into middle school.
Right.
That was pretty remarkable. Is that still? Do you think that's still working? Is that is that a stable kind of situation?
Yeah, they've been doing it the entire semester, and they said that they have like nobody kind of in their families have gotten sick or anything like that. That pod worked. Obviously, like the part of the challenge for them was just making sure that everybody was like doing their work and staying focused and stuff. And I mentioned how that was kind of put on some of the older kids when the parents weren't able to like be around, that they had to take on more of a parental role and try to watch over everybody, which is something a lot to ask of a middle schooler. And so that was something that was really interesting to hear about. And I'm actually kind of curious as to, there was a parent's perspective, but they said that the kids really enjoyed it. And I think they would have enjoyed it more than trying to do it all alone, like just alone in their room, trying to do the remote learning, that they had people around and it felt more like a classroom environment. So I think that part was really interesting and it made it seem like it was more enjoyable. However, I mentioned before that a barrier to my own process with it, and we talked about this a little bit, that I should have pressed further on it, is that it was a little bit, it was a little bit strange that considering COVID and stuff, that they were getting together, like kind of, multiple people from, the neighborhood or whatever. And it didn't seem entirely like that whole COVID thing was weird to me. And I didn't really know politically where they stood. And I just didn't, I kind of backed off of that and didn't really want to press. Even though that was somewhere I probably should have, because that would have been really interesting to hear about.
Yeah, it would have, and you can still kind of pursue that because just for your own benefit, I think the decision, the kind of decision that people make is going to be completely different in a pod, and the assessment of risk is going to be different, and certainly the benefits. So I think it's a different people in a different context are obviously just going to think differently about.
Sure,
But-
yeah. I mean, when I talked to my mom about it, she was like, "Yeah, there's no way that like I would have considered like inviting people into our house, and at this point, if you were in that position, you were this age, like, she wouldn't have done something like that." And these are people, that's like one of her coworkers and stuff that she knows, and so yeah, it was just really, yeah, that part was interesting, no doubt.
Yeah, I think it gets a little bit at how people make decisions about risk and reward, and it is a
Yeah.
balance, and it is contextual, and it's very complicated. So it's really hard to make a judgment on it. So what were your takeaways personally about the process? And what did you learn either about the content of this issue or the process that you went through?
Well, there's kind of two things that that I'm thinking of saying about that. I think for me personally, like in terms of working on this, it kind of made me realize, like when you have these kind of connections, these people, that people are really willing to help, like with these projects and stuff, and especially when, like the kind of prompting them as to what it was, like giving them background on it. Everybody was like, really excited to help and give their perspective, which is big for me moving forward in terms of like trying to do projects like this in the future and trying to get like the masters in social work and stuff, like just always trying to always being comfortable reaching out because people are usually willing to help, and that's not something that like is super easy or comes naturally to me. It's like trying to reach out for resources and stuff, but I was like really blown away by how helpful people were. But then like on the other hand, in terms of the content of what we talked about, it was just kind of another, it was really sad actually, it was kind of another like foundational of at like the very basis, like the quality is definitely worse than when everybody's together and we have more of a grip on everything, and she feels like a lot of these kids are going to really fall behind, and they were already behind. And then meanwhile, like at like in the public school district that the pod group is in, it's like in the most affluent community that high school is like basically a college campus. It's like super well funded and is really high quality and stuff. And these kids all have their little desks set up in the basement with their headphones in, and they're really they can be more locked in and have everything at everything they could need. And they're gonna not, maybe it's not perfect, but they're not gonna fall behind as much, and they're so I think that was kind of a sad, that was a sad thing I was seeing, is that this is just another example of how privileged still, like privileged people stay privileged and produce, and underprivileged people, like that they stay in those cycles because of stuff like this. So yeah.
Yeah, got it. It's kind of a multiplier. Privilege has kind of multiplier effect on all other aspects.
Right.
Right. Good. Okay. Okay. I want to say that we're kind of now. Oh, I guess we got about 7 minutes left. I really appreciated all your work, and I hope you can get to me your transcripts and I feel like that would really help me round out what you said. Um, so please do that. And I really enjoyed this. I was myself struggling with how to adapt the this process to a remote environment. So in a way, it was I really appreciate your flexibility and responding to it, because this is not it's the first time I've done it, a kind of placement or internship that was not in person, where we could really exchange things more easily. And I've been talking to other people who there's a tremendous amount of nuance, I think, in what I'm learning about the context of these situations. And I think all of us are struggling with how to really make this remote environment work. And I had a very interesting conversation with one of our volunteers who was doing facilitating education groups, and the difficulty of reading people's facial expressions and body language when you've got just one flat two-dimensional presentation, and you miss a lot of it's really just of headshots. And the difficulty then of you have to not only keep the pace of interaction is different. I'm seeing a lot quicker paced activity, and rather than long presentations, I'm seeing the advantage of having quicker, shorter clusters or chunks of information, and then trying to build an interaction. So it's really a very different learning environment and teaching environment that I'm experiencing, and other people in NAMI are. And of course, there are some advantages to people who have a certain type of anxiety about being in public, as well as it tends to equalize some things having to do with transportation and moving from one physical place to another. So there are those advantages, but the whole way the interaction occurs really has to be different. And we're really struggling with that, because there's not as much as many social cues. The social interactions are much more constrained, and so it's harder to read people. It's hard to talk to people. It's hard to have conversations. I see everybody's muted, which is, of course, the right thing to do. But then it makes actually having an interaction. There's one additional step, which is unmuting, and then then you have to worry about, when everybody's unmuted and talking, stepping on each other and talking over talking. So there's just a lot of little inhibitions and that tend to govern how easily these interactions happen. So I'm really want to say I'm just struggling with this as well. And I think we'll all probably be getting better at it. But it's going to be hard to really teach and the people how to do it differently. And it's going to be hard to model it because you don't have the social cues. So a lot of the modeling is much more difficult. So the context is really, really different. I really appreciate the variety. One of the things I really think that we got, quite accidentally, but I'm not surprised, because whenever we do this kind of exploratory interviewing or focus groups, you get a tremendous variety. And we got a really tremendous variety of people and situations. So that was really great. And and I hope it was interesting and useful for you all as well. So what we're going to do in the future, and then we'll just kind of chat in the last couple of minutes. What we're doing in the future is working on this issue of digital equity with someone in the School of Information. The School of Information used to be this School of Library Science, and they transformed themselves about 10 or 15 years ago into information because as libraries got to be online, libraries became different places. So they were no longer just the repository of documents and books and objects. They became places where people convened, and community knowledge centers became quite the thing. So they really have ballooned into schools of information that have become much more diverse than they were. You know, the typical idea of the librarian, Marion the librarian, and like in that comedy thing. So that kind of stereotype is really completely gone. So they're really interested in how people take to this digital world and the inequities involved with it. So we're going to be continuing to work on the digital equity issues with them. And you're welcome to come back if you have the stomach or the time. And you're of course welcome to volunteer with NAMI and join us in this. And we have another, if I can pitch another project, that'll be the consortium that we're doing for educating office holders. So there are a lot of projects having to do with mental health, and we came to realize at NAMI that we simply had to have some new infrastructures in this remote environment, and one of them had to deal with digital equity because we were never going to diversify ourselves unless we were dealt with the notions of digital equity straight on, because for the same reasons that you all have found that people who have advantage have access to this information, but people who don't have access to computers and internet connections are really at a disadvantage. And so we really need to, that's the whole digital equity part. The office holder aspect of it has to do with the importance coming out of the elections, this traumatic election process. We have just really, I think, has sharpened our appreciation of how important elected officials are to how mental health, mental health and justice issues are resolved. And because they control everything from the police to housing to mental health services to education services. And so it's just a wide swath. And we really need to take on educating office holders about mental health and justice issues, and do it in a kind of much more focused and consistent way. So if you're interested, you have my number and you know how to get in touch. And also, the third thing I want to say before we part, I think this is our last meeting, isn't it? So I want to say that I really would appreciate keeping in touch. And if you need letters of recommendation, or if I can be of some advice regarding professional schools like social work or psychology, or public health, public policy, I'd be happy to help. And I really would be delighted to see these things carry forward, because so much of what we do is long term. And that means if you don't keep in touch with people, you can't see the fruits of your labor. So I really would appreciate keeping in touch with you all. So now, what is your comment? Caitlin, can we start with you?
I
What-
don't really have any comments, I don't think.
Okay.
I think this semester's been really great. Yeah, I would like to, continue, helping out. I just have to see, how next semester goes for me, based on like time that I have.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's great. And a lot of everything we're doing is remote, so the name of the game. It's in many ways it's easier than having to schlep across town. So, but thank you. How about you, Lauren? Any comments, any final?
Yeah, this has been a really great opportunity. I would also really like to come back. I was probably gonna have to be after my last semester here because it's pretty busy for me.
Yeah,
Because I am graduating and I do have some final things to do. But I'll be here for another year in Ann Arbor. So, and I also live apparently right around the corner from your base headquarters. So I'd be happy to come over and help with you all with anything you're working on
yeah,
in the year. Just literally probably not next semester because I
yeah.
think I'm having 17 or 18 credits.
Oh my
And I'm
God.
already, yeah, COVID shifted a lot of my stuff around. I had to push some things to this semester because they weren't being offered. So it's what it is. But yeah, I'll be glad to come back. But I also have another meeting. I'm sorry, we have a house meeting.
Okay,
But I really appreciate all of your work, everybody here. This has been a great time for me.
thank you.
I guess I'll leave my email in the chat if anybody ever wants to email me.
Okay, great. How about you, Maggie?
Yeah, I
Okay.
just want to thank you for this. I really enjoyed having, and like, I know it was a struggle changing this to remote because I'm sure it would have been a lot different a semester ago or like before COVID. But we really appreciate it. Like, hopefully I'm speaking for everyone, your efforts to moving this online and being able to like be flexible with everything.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Thank you for your work, and I really appreciate it. I know it was difficult, but I think I really got a lot out of it, and we'll be processing this next term, and we're going to do another project outreach and combine some school information students. So should be pretty cool. So thanks for starting this off and helping us. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Bye bye,
Okay,
everyone.
bye bye.
Bye.
Hopefully someday we'll meet in person.
Bye bye.
Okay, bye.